Did it come? Oh yeah. I've been looking for a new mattress. I wake up in the morning, sometimes my neck hurts, sometimes my back hurts. I just need something firmer. So I ordered the NOLA Evolution Luxury Firm mattress to try out. I've heard good things about NOLA. All of their mattresses are created without the use of harmful chemicals, and none contain fiberglass. Holy cow! And they offer a 120-day sleep trial, so I can have more than 3 months to try this out. And they delivered it right to my door. Shipping in the US is free. Oh, I'm in heaven. Can you guess what these are? These are pillows. How could these possibly be pillows? Holy cow, they're expanding. They really know how to pack. I don't want to get up. Okay, it's been a few days, so I thought I'd give you an update. I am loving the new mattress. The pressure point relief that it has is saving me from the aches and pains I was having. An unexpected advantage is it regulates the heat better. I sleep cooler. If you're looking to upgrade your sleep, head to nolamattress.com and use the code WORLDOFANTIQUITY, all one word, to get an extra $50 off your NOLA mattress. And you'll get 2 free pillows. NOLA mattresses include a limited lifetime warranty, and they offer financing options and flexible payment plans. It was meant to be the largest obelisk in the history of ancient Egypt, weighing over 1,000 tons. But something went wrong. A crack formed. The project was abandoned. No temple ever received it. No king ever stood beside it. And yet it remains one of the most important monuments the Egyptians ever left behind. You could call this ancient Egypt's Apollo 13, an ambitious mission that didn't reach its destination, but it still tells us more about Egyptian engineering than some of their greatest successes. In this episode, we're heading into the granite quarries of Aswan to find out, amongst other things, how the Egyptians planned to carve, move, and transport the largest stone they ever attempted, and why its failure may be just as revealing as its completion would have been. Welcome to Antiquities Explorer, your guide to historic places. Follow us to different countries as we search for ancient artifacts. If you too wish to explore the ancient past through travel, we'll help you plan where to go, what to see, and how best to enjoy what you encounter. In this series of Antiquities Explorer, you can accompany us on our trek through Upper Egypt, homeland of the ancient Egyptians and Nubians. Come on, let's go. We've been staying at the Move and Pick Hotel on Elephantine Island. It's a beautiful place and highly recommended if you ever choose to travel here. Their meze restaurant specializes in authentic Egyptian food, and it did not disappoint. When you come to Egypt to learn about its antiquities, don't avoid the local culture. Immerse yourself in it. It will give you an idea of what it was like to live in this area in ancient times. Even today, the food is taken right here from the land. Traditions carry on. Ancient Egypt's most breathtaking monuments all share one fundamental secret: stone. Granite was one of ancient Egypt's most prized building materials, used for obelisks and statues, stelae, sarcophagi, interior chambers of pyramids, and the structural elements of temples, meant to last forever. Its durability symbolized permanence, eternity, making it the stone of choice for monuments honoring gods and kings. The region around Aswan was the Egyptians' primary source. The pinkish red stone found here, now called Aswan granite, was both durable and visually striking. And it's not just the quarries that had it, it's all over the place here. With the Nile flowing just alongside the quarry sites, Aswan offered the perfect combination of high-quality material and a natural transport route, allowing massive blocks to be floated north to the great temples and tombs of Upper and Lower Egypt. But have you ever wondered how exactly the Egyptians extracted these enormous blocks? How did they manage to move, shape, and transform this unyielding material into structures that have stood for millennia? Today we're heading straight to the source, into the heart of ancient Egypt's granite quarries.
Okay. The Egyptians were great at quarrying and transporting granite, so we're going to go there to see that.
The granite quarries of this area are windows into the minds of ancient Egyptian engineers and craftspeople. Their abandoned tools and unfinished works still whisper secrets about techniques, challenges, and failures. Today we'll listen closely to what the clues they left behind tell us, and see what we can discover. Our journey begins on Sahel Island, just south of Aswan. It's a place that most tourists overlook, yet it holds vital clues to Egypt's past and to the granite industry that flourished here in Aswan, ancient Swenet, in the dynastic age. From there we'll move on to one of Aswan's northern quarries, home of the famous and still puzzling Unfinished Obelisk. Sahel Island sits at a strategic spot along the Nile, just upstream from Elephantini. Right away as we walk among these rocks, we start seeing inscriptions, records left by visitors and workers from ancient times. It's remarkably peaceful today, but imagine this place buzzing with activity thousands of years ago when a project was underway. The steady sound of stone striking stone, probably echoing across the Nile. Notice how basically the island is just full of granite boulders. It was a common practice, you see, to shape the boulders into blocks, or whatever other shape you wanted. This didn't require any excavation. All your work team had to do was pick out a boulder of about the right size, or split a big one in two, roughly carve the boulder into whatever shape was wanted with hard stone tools, iron in later times. Maybe the bigger ones they could roll down the hill first. And then after it was in a reasonable shape, haul it on board a barge. The finer work could be done at the destination site. These minor inscriptions aren't just graffiti, they're ancient snapshots into the daily life and religious devotion of those who traveled here. You see, Sahel Island was far more than just a quarry for granite. It was a vibrant crossroads of religion, industry, and politics. This place was a key stopover point for merchants, pilgrims, and workers traveling along the Nile. Many inscriptions here record brief prayers or offerings to local deities, such as Khnum, the creator god associated with the annual flooding of the Nile, as well as Satet and Anuket, goddesses linked to Elephantini Island, or Amun, the national god of Egypt. Other inscriptions mark the presence of officials, priests, or artisans who hope to earn favor or commemorate their visit. But among these inscriptions, one monument towers in historical significance and intrigue, and it's up at the top. If you come here, this is something you don't want to pass over.
Well, I brought the group up here because I wanted to show them this. Okay? Look at this amazing inscription. It's one of the more famous inscriptions from ancient Egypt, and it's called the Famine Stela because it's all about a famine. You see, there's a story here relating to none other than King Djoser of the 3rd dynasty. He was the founder of the Old Kingdom. This is way back in the 3rd millennium BCE, and it talks about a famine that occurred during his reign that lasted for 7 years. And he didn't know what to do. He was at his wit's end. But he turned to his vizier, the famous Imhotep. You probably heard of him, the architect of the step pyramid of Saqqara. And he was a polymath. He knew how to do everything, Imhotep. And he asked Imhotep, what can we do about this famine? So Imhotep told him, you must make offerings to Khnum, the god Khnum, and he will reward you. So this is exactly what Djoser did. And he made the offerings to Khnum, and then Khnum appeared to him in a dream. And in this dream, Khnum said, because you have done this for me, I will make the waters of the Nile rise again, and the famine will be ended. So he did this, and the famine was ended. Now, why was this story put here? You can kind of imagine why. Oh, that's the most important part I forgot. At the end, Djoser tells Khnum that he will build him a temple. And that's the temple of Khnum that we saw yesterday at Elephantine Island, right? So that's how this is like the origin story of that temple, which of course means that this was written after that temple was built, and it's actually kind of a late temple, as you know. Yes, this famine stela is from the Greco-Roman period. It's from the Ptolemaic times, when the Greeks were ruling Egypt. It is not an early inscription from the time of Djoser at all. And you may recognize the story somewhat. It sounds familiar. I don't know if any of you can think of a story that sounds kind of like this story, but there's a story in the book of Genesis in the Bible about how there was a famine that hit Egypt for 7 years, and the Pharaoh turns to his right-hand man, Joseph, to ask him what to do about the famine. And there's, of course, nothing about Khnum in there, but he says, if you do such and such, if you save up the food over the 7 years. And so anyway, he gives him the plan to save him from this famine. So we wonder, like, is there some kind of a connection between the two stories? It could just be coincidence. The idea of 7-year famines is not the number 7 is a sacred number in a lot of lands. It means completeness, fullness. So 7-year famine means like a complete and total famine. It's symbolically significant. So it could be a coincidence, but this idea of the Pharaoh turning to his prime minister and asking him what to do, there's some similarities here. Now, people have said, well, is the Bible based on this story of Djoser? Because Djoser was much earlier than the Bible. Well, the thing is, this is the only version of the story we have, and it comes from the Ptolemaic period, which is a time after the Bible had already been translated into Greek in Egypt and would have been published in Egypt at this time. So it could be the other way around. It could be that maybe this is, they knew the Bible story, because people would read it in Greek, and maybe it would be based on that. Or it could just be a coincidence.
Was there an actual famine? Do they know that?
In the time of Djoser, well, I don't think there's any way to tell, but it's probably made up just to show that, you know what, everybody? When we're in rough times, when there's a drought, and food is not growing, we must turn to Khnum. And therefore, you must support the priesthood,
You might be wondering about this big fracture in the rock. Did someone deface the famine stela purposely in later times? Was there some kind of natural disturbance? Well, nobody knows exactly what caused the crack, but close examination reveals that the fracture was here before the inscription was written, as the writer of the inscription deliberately worked around it. This suggests he chose this stone despite its flaw. It was large and central. That's what mattered. Practical availability seems to have outweighed perfection in surface quality, and going by all the other inscriptions here, that was pretty much standard practice.
Someone just asked if this was a forgery, and in one sense you could kind of say it is, because they actually have Djoser here, representing it as if Djoser made the inscription, right? Because they have his name here, both in a cartouche and a serak, his Horus name and his, I'm assuming that's his throne name, and then the 3 gods of Aswan, right? Khnum, Satet, and Anuket here, the Holy Triad. We've seen it in the temples over there. But clearly this is from those times when these 3 gods were being promoted. And so yeah, I guess it is a bit of a forgery.
There's something humbling about being here, surrounded by these weathered rocks, some scarred by the hands of workers, others inscribed by people long forgotten. You can almost feel the centuries pressing in around you. This is not a grand temple or a royal tomb, but in some ways that makes it even more significant. This was a working landscape, a place of effort and devotion, of ordinary people and practical gods. You don't just learn history in a place like this, you feel it. After a night at the Move and Pick and a delicious buffet breakfast, we made our way to one of the most extraordinary sites in southern Egypt. A place not only where many granite objects were excavated, but where ambition met with failure. The Quarry of the Unfinished Obelisk. And what we're going to see at this granite quarry are some notable differences with what we saw on Sahel Island. As we explore the site, we'll take a closer look at how the Egyptians shaped and removed stone from the bedrock, and how even today their methods continue to challenge our understanding.
Granite. In our hotel on the stairway, you see going up the stairs at our hotel? Yep. That's the famous Aswan granite. They still use it today.
You don't come here to see what was built. You come to see what was almost built. And that's what makes this site so valuable. It's not just a monument, it's a snapshot of ancient engineering in action. This is where we get to peek behind the curtain and see how the magic was made.
Oh, look, you can even see some of the wedge marks on that stone up there. They were going to break a piece off.
It's even got a spotlight pointing to it. Yes.
Yeah. Now, if you remember what we saw over on Sahel Island, there were a lot of granite boulders, big spheroidal boulders. And in early times, in the Pharaonic period, when they were looking for granite blocks to make things with, or to make any granite object, they would go for these boulders. They're already there, just sitting on the surface. And you can use your dolerite pounders, the stone, to get them into shape, okay? But when you get into the New Kingdom, and they start wanting to do these large obelisks, okay? There's no boulder that you can use for an obelisk. So this necessitated that they had to carve down into the bedrock itself. And this was a much more arduous process. These are dolerite pounders. These are the tools that were left here at the site, the only tools that we see around here, and this is the reason why we think that these were the main instrument used to carve the granite. Dolerite is harder than granite, okay? And you can find veins of it right even here at the site. Now, most of them are very rounded, and so some scholars believe, like, well, this is basically the tool you're looking at, and they would use these. You could bounce them or do something like that. But there are others who think that maybe these originally were a little bit more like a blade sharpened on one end, but the more you use it, the more dull it gets. And then after they get really dull, they don't need it anymore, and they go for another one. You could also resharpen it with another piece if you wanted to. But these are the main tools. One person trying to pound away. Yeah, sometimes you'll see some of the alternative history channels saying, you know, like, look, nothing, can't be done. But you get hundreds of workers doing this, hours and hours on end, okay? There was a lot of labor involved, but they did have the patience and the money and the manpower. I mean, they didn't mind losing people. We have an inscription from the time of Ramses IV. They talk about a quarrying expedition they had. 9,000 men were used on this quarrying expedition, and they lost 900 men. 1/10 of their workforce to the hazards of the job. So, men were expendable. Look at that, it's coming off. It's not really as hard as people try to make it out to be. See all of these, it's like a patchwork of all of these indentations, you see? But each one is where one person is working the rock. And then there's another person next to him, you know? Each one is a patch made by somebody else. And notice that they're all different sizes, right? These are not all precise squares or anything like that, okay? Which tells you these are individualized, each individual person pounding away at the rock. Not a machine that cuts things out all equal in size or something like that. These are individualized patches. One process that the ancient Egyptians may have used in order to loosen up the granite to make it easier to carve away is fire setting. And you can see some evidence of heated rock over here. You see these cracks that you see here? There's a flaking. See the flaking over here? Okay, this is caused by heat. Recently, Adel Kalani, I interviewed him on the channel. He did some fire setting experiments here to determine, how much easier it would be to break away the granite with the dolerite pounders after fire setting, and he found that it significantly reduced the time that would be needed to carve away at the granite. So fire setting may very well have been used here. It's been used in other countries and in other time periods to loosen up rock, and so it could have been also one of the processes used by the Egyptians. Whenever you see these holes like this, these are believed to be test pits. In other words, they want to see what the integrity of the rock is. Like, okay, if we start carving out something here, how far down can we go where it isn't fractured or there are any fissures or anything like this? So they would have men dig out these test pits to see what the integrity of the stone was. Will it hold up? Is it strong enough? And so forth. You could actually see a line going right through here. This is a crack in the rock, see? But they are doing these to test how well it will hold up. And they're all over the place around here. There's a real deep one over here. Check this one out. So first they carved a channel going through here, and then they wanted to go down deep to see how far down it held up. And boy, it goes down very deep. This is only enough room here for one guy. So, in other words, he would have been digging. They probably changed men out, and then they would pull the dust up and out of it and see how far down they could go. But look how far down they were able to go. Look at this. This, had it been completed, would have been the largest granite obelisk the Egyptians ever made. And they got pretty far, as you can see. Now, most people say that this is a Hatshepsut obelisk. But recently, some work that has been done here in the quarry, there was an inscription found here credited to Thutmose III. And so there is another theory that it may have been her successor, Thutmose III, who is the one that was working on this obelisk. If it were completed, they estimate its weight to have been 1,168 tons, not pounds, tons.
What I love about it is that you can still see the contrast between vision and reality, frozen in mid-execution. Once the trench reached a sufficient depth, workers began undercutting the obelisk from below. This final stage, freeing the base, was the most dangerous. What we see underneath the obelisk here are distinct impact marks from the pounding. These aren't random, they form regular rows, a result of coordinated teams working in shifts to maintain an even trench. The process was systematic, disciplined, and strategic.
Seeing all the marks of clear hand tools, it's really amazing that people could talk about how it's machines, right? They're not even.
At some point, during the undercutting process, a major crack formed in the granite, and that was it. We don't know whether the fracture happened suddenly or was the result of accumulated stress, but with the obelisk now structurally compromised, continuing the project would have been pointless. All that labor, all that stone, and the project was abandoned.
So here we are. The unfinished obelisk is just right over there. And then we have this recently found inscription here. And you can see it belongs to a king. There's a cartouche right down here, and that's the cartouche of Thutmose III. Now, I recently, a couple of years ago, I interviewed Adel Kalani, who worked here, and he's the one who was the discoverer of this inscription. And now there's the theory that this is a record of the making of that obelisk, which would mean that it isn't Hatshepsut who had that obelisk carved out, but actually Thutmose III, her successor.
The inscription speaks of the king ordering the excavation of 2 obelisks to bring to the temple of Amun at Karnak. but only one of these obelisks made it to Karnak. So it has been proposed that the other obelisk is the one still sitting here in the quarry. So imagine for a moment that this obelisk, this giant of stone, had never cracked. It had been fully quarried, freed from the bedrock, and made ready for its journey north. What would it take to move something this massive from here in Aswan to its intended temple?
Now this area here to the north, where it goes down the hill here, there's evidence that already a lot of this had been cleared out by the time this was being made, but they were thinking that this would be the way to get it out. And there is evidence that even during the time of the making of the obelisk, there was a whole full-scale quarrying operation going on here to make a channel to get to the river. And in fact, they did some soundings into the ground, and all the way to the river they were able to track where this channel was going to be, because a lot of it was already made. And it went to the Nile River. So we believe that they would have brought this obelisk out this way, okay? They'd probably have to clear a lot of that out first and bring it down here. It is downhill to the river, which makes things a little bit easier. And they would have used sand on the track to make it a little bit easier to bring it down. But the fact that they made the channel to get it out tells us this is exactly what they were planning to do.
The obelisk likely rested on a wooden cradle or sled, and a large number of workers would have been required to pull it. Our best estimate suggests over 3,400 workers pulling simultaneously. Add to that support crews, engineers, overseers, water carriers, route preparers, all needed for this phase alone. The corridor would have been flattened and packed with Nile silt or clay, wetted constantly to reduce friction. Once the obelisk reached the riverbank, it would have to be loaded onto a specifically constructed barge. This was not just any boat. To carry a monolith this size, the vessel would need to displace over 1,200 cubic meters of water. The barge would likely need to be at least 57 meters long and 14 meters wide, with a draft of around 1.5 meters. Now, we don't have a depiction of the unfinished obelisk in transit, but we do have a remarkable precedent. On the walls of her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari, Queen Hatshepsut commissioned a relief showing two of her obelisks being transported on a barge from the quarry at Aswan to the Temple of Amun at Karnak. And yes, you heard that right. 2 obelisks on one barge. Each of Hatshepsut's obelisks, which are now at Karnak, weighed in the neighborhood of 325 to 350 metric tons each, and stood nearly 30 meters tall. The relief shows them laid out flat, on a single massive vessel, their pointed pyramidia facing opposite ends, forming a balanced load. That's 675 tons in total weight. The accompanying text claims that the entire project, from quarrying to raising, took just 7 months. That's a statement as much about royal authority and resources as it is about logistics, but the scale of the operation is clear. Now you might be wondering, how do you move something this massive down the Nile? The answer is surprisingly simple. You don't. The river does it for you. The Nile flows gently northward year-round. Once the barge was launched, buoyed by the obelisk's weight and cradled in a specially constructed hull, the current carried it downstream, slowly but steadily. But this wasn't a free ride. Even though the river did the heavy lifting, the barge itself had no engine. It still needed a crew to steer, balance, and protect it. Support boats may have traveled alongside, prepared for emergencies or course corrections. The scene of Hatshepsut's barge shows it being escorted by smaller boats, many of them apparently tethered with ropes and filled with rowers. These vessels helped guide, stabilize, and possibly even brake the barge, especially during docking or tight turns in the river. If the unfinished obelisk had been successfully quarried, it likely would have followed a similar route. But it never happened. Without a perfectly sound monolith, the investment of building the barge, organizing the crews, and risking the entire journey just wasn't worth it. Still, this site tells us something remarkable. That the ancient Egyptians weren't just dreamers. They were planners, engineers, problem solvers. They looked at a piece of bedrock like this and saw a monument already taking shape in their minds. This wasn't just a monument that failed, it was a monument that almost succeeded. You could think of it as ancient Egypt's Apollo 13, the one that showed just how far they were willing to go. But the story didn't stop when the workers walked away. In fact, the unfinished obelisk became something else entirely, a resource.
Look at the wedge marks there along the top. This is evidence that in later times, after this was abandoned, they thought, hey, we could still use something, and someone was going to attempt to take off the top to use that, but they actually never quite took it off. Looks like some stuff was taken off the side here, though.
For centuries, workers came back here, not to marvel at it, but to cut it up. Later quarrymen, probably in the Roman period or even in the early Islamic centuries, tried to salvage usable granite from this enormous failed project. Look closely and you'll see the scars. Channels carved, wedges inserted, and blocks partially detached. But even then the stone proved stubborn. Many of these attempts were abandoned mid-cut. There's a tendency today to look at monuments like this and say, they couldn't have done it. It's too big, too heavy, too precise, too advanced. But that reaction isn't based on evidence. It's based on underestimating people who lived before us. I think that this incredulous attitude says more about us than it does about them. When people say this couldn't have been done, what they often mean is they themselves can't imagine how it was done. But that's not evidence of mystery. That's evidence of a gap in imagination. They had the tools, they had the knowledge, they had the patience, they had the time, and above all, they had the will. These were people with centuries of experience, state-level organization, and a deep understanding of their tools and materials. They didn't need lasers or acoustic levitation. Was it hard? Of course. But the fact that it was hard, and that they still attempted it, is what makes it so amazing. In 1970, Apollo 13 didn't land on the moon, but it became one of the greatest engineering stories of the modern age, not because the mission succeeded, but because the effort to succeed revealed the full scope of human ingenuity. And standing here, I can't help but think the same is true of this obelisk. The Egyptians didn't abandon this because they lacked vision. They abandoned it because they understood the limits of what could and couldn't be salvaged. That doesn't make them primitive, it makes them pragmatic. And the fact that they attempted it at all, that they came this close, is a window into just how much they understood about materials, labor, and logistics. Even in failure, there's brilliance. If you've ever dreamed of turning your love of ancient cultures into a living, breathing adventure, then I've got something exciting for you. From November 3rd to 18th, 2025, I'm leading a small immersive tour through the heart of ancient Mexico. We'll explore the Olmec heartland at Tres Zapotes, San Lorenzo, and La Venta, where history's first stone-carved rulers still loom over the jungle. We'll stand before the unusual brick pyramids of Comalcalco. In Tabasco and Chiapas, we'll dive into the Maya world, Palenque's temple tombs, Bonampac's preserved murals, Yaxchilan's royal inscriptions. We'll get off the beaten path at Chincoltic and Tenampuente, sites you and your fellow travelers can practically claim as your own. In Oaxaca, Mitla's mosaic tunnels of sacred geometry and Monte Alban's hilltop city reveal Zapotec ingenuity. Then in central Mexico, we'll visit Cholula, home to the largest pyramid on Earth by volume, and Xochicalco, where astronomers once read the heavens. We'll explore Teotihuacan's grand cityscape, and end our journey in Veracruz at El Tajin's Pyramid of the Niches. It's like taking an on-campus course, but we're literally in the classrooms of ancient ruins. Reserve your spot now, before they're all gone. In our next episode, we leave the granite behind and step into the sacred, visiting two temples where the old gods of Egypt were still being worshipped long after pharaohs gave way to foreign kings. We'll explore some of the best preserved religious architecture of the Ptolemaic era. So if you're not already subscribed, now is the time, because this journey through Upper Egypt is just getting started.